Sunday, it's the terror of the 20th century, a viral killing machine called AIDS. Now there's renewed hope for those facing the coming plague, the price of passion. CNN Perspectives, Sunday, 8 Eastern on CNN.
Tonight on CNN's Larry King Live, President Clinton orders strikes against terrorist installations in Afghanistan and Sudan. Will this spark a holy war against the U.S.? The latest, tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Continuing our expanded coverage of this breaking story, we go down to Capitol Hill for more reaction from members of the U.S. Congress. Here's correspondent Candy Crowley.
Bernie, anytime a U.S. president takes action, there is going to be some quibbling here back home. That is true whether it is Ronald Reagan bombing Libya, George Bush going into the Gulf, or in this case, President Clinton taking out after terrorists. There were a handful of senators and congressmen who did question the timing of this because it comes one day after the a couple of days after the president's testimony before the Starr investigation. One of those who questioned whether now was not an effort to divert attention from that testimony was Senator Arlen Specter.
I would like to know on the response so fast as to what the imminence was of a problem arising out of the Sudan or a problem arising out of Afghanistan.
Now, we should note that Senator Specter did say that he supports the move. He just questions the timing. By and large, though, members of Congress and members of the Senate were supportive, such as Senator Orrin Hatch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks for being willing to take this type of action. Don't make it the last time. Let's wage a war against terrorism in this world, and this is a good beginning.
As per usual, some of the members were critical that they had not been told of the attacks in advance. However, some had been, among them Majority Leader Trent Lott in the Senate and House Speaker Newt Gingrich. Lott was supportive of the president's move, as was Speaker Gingrich, who called it the right thing to do at the right time. The president also picked up very important support from Senator Jesse Helms, no friend of the president, but certainly supportive of U.S. military action at this point. Bernie?
Candy Crowley with the latest from the Hill. Jeff Greenfield.
Okay, as you know, Senator Dan Coates was one of the two senators, along with Arlen Specter, who raised some questions about the timing of these strikes. Senator Coates of Indiana, who is retiring after this year, joins me now, along with Representative Lee Hamilton, also of Indiana. Senator Coates, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. As you know, there's been an awful lot of reaction to your comment that this might well have been politically motivated. What basis do you have to make that argument?
Well, it's so uncharacteristic of this president, first of all, to respond quickly. This administration has been known for talking tough and not following it up with any action. This surprised everybody. I'm not saying that action shouldn't have been taken against known terrorist targets. I'm simply saying that the timing is so extraordinary at a time when the president is in political extremis that I think it'll be misinterpreted around the world. I think it'll be an excuse that the opponents of the United States will use to criticize our actions. I think our friends will raise a lot of questions about whether or not there are political motives. And I'm not sure that there was enough justification for this particular bombing. We don't know all that for sure. It's interesting that the Khobar Towers, which were bombed 2 years ago in Saudi Arabia, the administration is still gathering evidence in terms of who might have been involved in this. And has not taken action.
Okay.
And secondly, let me just say that it's also interesting that the president himself said we've known that this terrorist group in the past has taken action against Americans. Well, if we've known that in the past, why didn't we act then? Why now?
Congressman Hamilton, the senator raised the question in his earlier comments that having broken the bond of trust with the American people, why should we believe him now? What is your response to Senator Coates' question?
I think the key question here is, was it in the American national interest to strike? And I think it was. The facts are, I believe, that the investigators of the bombings have picked up a lot of information and intelligence that pinpoint the terrorists in Afghanistan, the base camps there. I think the evidence is that Americans were probably going to be under attack somewhere, I don't know where, very soon. You know, we always hear this charge against an American president when he acts decisively. Just this morning, I was reading and listening, and the president was being attacked because he was incapacitated, because he was unable to act, because he was distracted. Now he has acted, and the criticism flips 180 degrees and says now he's acting because of political reasons. They can't have it both ways.
Congressman, you're speaking to a fellow Hoosier here in Senator Coates, but is it potentially, are those kinds of comments potentially damaging to the interests of the United States?
I don't really think so. My guess is that the international community is going to be strongly supportive of the president. Clearly, Senator Coates, who's my good friend, indicates he supports the action, although he questions the timing. The congressional leadership, Democratic and Republican, has supported it. You'll find a very solid support for the president's action, not only in the Congress, but among the American people and with our friends abroad.
Senator Coates, there's an old comment that politics stops at the water's edge, which I suppose, if it ever was true, was kind of made obsolete by the Vietnam War. But was there any hesitancy in your mind that at a time when American force was being used abroad, that this might not have been the right time, literally within moments of the attack, to raise questions about its motivation?
There was a great deal of hesitancy. I thought about this long and hard. I'm very concerned that once the president has so deceived the American people, the Congress and others, lied for months, blocked investigation, blamed someone else, that break of the bond of trust always creates that dark cloud of suspicion about what his motives are and whether he's doing it for the right motives. I've always been one to support the president, to try to make sure foreign policy, partisan politics stops at the water's edge. Yet the timing of this is so extraordinary, and it's so uncharacteristic of this president. I think a lot of Americans and a lot of people around the world are going to be raising legitimate questions. Why was this done now? Did this make sense? We'll learn more about this, I suppose, as more information comes out. I serve on the Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee. This is a total surprise to many of us here. I'm not saying the administration had to call me up before they took this action. It's just that that cloud of doubt is there now because the president has put himself, I think, in a position where it's hard for us to trust his motives and trust what he says.
Thank you, Senator Coates, Congressman Hamilton. We thank you both for joining us. Reminder, President Clinton's speech to the nation is coming up at 5:32, so please stay with us here at CNN. We'll be back after this.
Tonight on CNN's Larry King Live, the latest on the American attack against terrorists in Afghanistan and Sudan. Tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Are you paying too much for term life insurance? Now, through Matrix Direct, a 35-year-old man could get $250,000 term life coverage for less than $18 a month, guaranteed for 10 years from a top insurer, Transamerica. A 42-year-old man could get $100,000 term life coverage for less than $14 a month. Call for a fast free quote over the phone. Matrix Direct, 1-800-725-5728.
Summer, a time for traveling, a time for long drives. This summer, the heat's up on Stars, with some of Hollywood's hottest stars in some of the coolest movies. Yeah. If you have Stars, you've already seen some of the big movies we have to offer. Good call! But you haven't seen anything yet. So tune into Stars all summer for the coolest movies on the hottest channel.
To order, call Comcast today.
Early Edition with Donna Kelly and Leon Harris, 7 Eastern weekdays on CNN.
U.S. cruise missiles today struck locations in both Sudan and Afghanistan in retaliation for the strikes against American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania just days ago. We are in the midst of live coverage of this story that continues to develop at this hour. President Clinton made the announcement just a few hours ago, and we are waiting any moment now for him to give us further information from the White House. He's been there meeting with his national security team. I'm here in our Washington bureau with Bernard Shaw, Jeff Greenfield, and our own Wolf Blitzer is at the White House. Wolf, the president, tell us with whom the president's been meeting.
The president's been meeting, Judy, with his top national security advisors here at the White House. The National Security Advisor, Sandy Berger, the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, the Defense Secretary, William Cohen, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hugh Shelton. He gave the actual order after Mr. Clinton signed off on it this morning for those U.S. cruise missiles to strike at Osama bin Laden's bases in Afghanistan and at that suspected chemical weapons facility in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. The president, as soon as he's finished with his meeting with his national security advisors, will then prepare to address the nation from the Oval Office. We're expecting a short speech, 6, 7, perhaps 8 minutes, in which Mr. Clinton will formally outline why he decided to do so. Will also give us an assessment, a preliminary assessment on the effectiveness of this operation, and he will issue what we're told will be a strong warning to terrorists around the world that the United States will act swiftly, decisively, once intelligence information is made available, linking suspected terrorist operations to actual people involved in those operations. Of course, Mr. Clinton will explain why it was necessary to do so, because U.S. intelligence had concluded that Osama bin Laden's group was responsible for the twin bombings at the U.S. embassies in Kenya and in Tanzania. But perhaps even more importantly, his advisors say, the U.S. intelligence community, working with others, had other intelligence information that this group was also planning additional strikes at U.S. targets around the world. We don't know what specific strikes were involved, but the president said that those were the main reasons why the U.S. decided to move as it did.
Wolf, we want to remind our viewers the White House is saying now the president will speak at 5:32 Eastern. We know those times can slip, but that's just a couple of minutes from now, and that's what we're expecting at this moment. How unusual is it, Wolf, for an operation like this to be as closely held in secret as this one apparently was?
Well, this one was totally in secret, and as Jamie McIntyre, our military affairs correspondent, has pointed out, that once cruise missiles are involved, as opposed to U.S. aircraft directly flying overhead over suspected territory, or ground troops, of course, it's easier to keep a mission like this secret. We're told that about a week or so ago, 8 days or so ago, the president got initial intelligence information linking Osama bin Laden's group to the bombings in East Africa. He was presented with various options last Friday and over the days that followed. Even at that national security meeting he had last Monday, only hours before his testimony before the Monica Lewinsky grand jury, Mr. Clinton was involved in looking at various options. Early this morning, a senior official of the National Security Council, General Donald Carrick, flew up to Martha's Vineyard with the actual operation, and Mr. Clinton signed off on the dotted line.
Wolf, as we know, U.S. intelligence operations have been criticized in recent years for a number of failures. This appears to be a situation where they did get information, important information, ahead of time.
And they can be thankful to other countries which were involved in helping the U.S., especially Pakistan. That's one of the reasons why President Clinton telephoned Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif earlier today to thank him. A suspect was arrested in Pakistan and sent back to Kenya, a suspect involved in the bombing operation, a link to Osama bin Laden, and as a result, his confession and other information that was made available, some of it in cooperation with various intelligence services of other nations, were very helpful in pinning the blame on Osama bin Laden.
All right, Wolf Blitzer at the White House, and Bernie, we are waiting for the president at this moment.
Indeed, we wait, Judy, and we won't have to wait too long. The president spoke to the world earlier at Martha's Vineyard, and he said, after speaking briefly, that he was going to fly back and do what Wolf reported, meet with his national security people, and he promised that he would have a more elaborate statement after that meeting. Well, we're just about 20 seconds away from the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, addressing not only the American people, but the world for that matter. As is customary, the presidential seal goes up, and I'm going to be quiet so we can listen.
Good afternoon. Today, I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan because of the imminent threat they presented to our national security. I want to speak with you about the objective of this action and why it was necessary. Our target was terror. Our mission was clear: to strike at the network of radical groups affiliated with and funded by Osama bin Laden, perhaps the preeminent organizer and financier of international terrorism in the world today. The groups associated with him come from diverse places but share a hatred for democracy, a fanatical glorification of violence, and a horrible distortion of their religion to justify the murder of innocents. They have made the United States their adversary precisely because of what we stand for and what we stand against. A few months ago, and again this week, bin Laden publicly vowed to wage a terrorist war against America, saying, and I quote, "We do not differentiate between those dressed in military uniforms and civilians. They're all targets. Their mission is murder, and their history is bloody." In recent years, they killed American, Belgian, and Pakistani peacekeepers in Somalia. They plotted to assassinate the President of Egypt and the Pope. They planned to bomb 6 United States 747s over the Pacific. They bombed the Egyptian embassy in Pakistan. They gunned down German tourists in Egypt. The most recent terrorist events are fresh in our memory. 2 weeks ago, 12 Americans and nearly 300 Kenyans and Tanzanians lost their lives, and another 5,000 were wounded when our embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam were bombed. There is convincing information from our intelligence community that the bin Laden terrorist network was responsible for these bombings. Based on this information, we have high confidence that these bombings were planned, financed, and carried out by the organization bin Laden leads. America has battled terrorism for many years. Where possible, we've used law enforcement and diplomatic tools to wage the fight. The long arm of American law has reached out around the world and brought to trial those guilty of attacks in New York, in Virginia, and in the Pacific. We have quietly disrupted terrorist groups and foiled their plots. We have isolated countries that practice terrorism. We've worked to build an international coalition against terror. But there have been and will be times when law enforcement and diplomatic tools are simply not enough, when our very national security is challenged, and when we must take extraordinary steps to protect the safety of our citizens. With compelling evidence that the bin Laden network of terrorist groups was planning to mount further attacks against Americans and other freedom-loving people, I decided America must act. And so this morning, based on the unanimous recommendation of my national security team, I ordered our armed forces to take action to counter an immediate threat from the bin Laden network. Earlier today, the United States carried out simultaneous strikes against terrorist facilities and infrastructure in Afghanistan. Our forces targeted one of the most active terrorist bases in the world. It contained key elements of the bin Laden network's infrastructure and has served as a training camp for literally thousands of terrorists from around the globe. We have reason to believe that a gathering of key terrorist leaders was to take place there today, thus underscoring the urgency of our actions. Our forces also attacked a factory in Sudan associated with the bin Laden network. The factory was involved in the production of materials for chemical weapons. The United States does not take this action lightly. Afghanistan and Sudan have been warned for years to stop harboring and supporting these terrorist groups. But countries that persistently host terrorists have no right to be safe havens. Let me express my gratitude to our intelligence and law enforcement agencies for their hard, good work. And let me express my pride in our armed forces who carried out this mission while making every possible effort to minimize the loss of innocent life. I want you to understand, I want the world to understand that our actions today were not aimed against Islam. The faith of hundreds of millions of good, peace-loving people all around the world, including the United States. No religion condones the murder of innocent men, women, and children. But our actions were aimed at fanatics and killers who wrap murder in the cloak of righteousness, and in so doing, profane the great religion in whose name they claim to act. My fellow Americans, our battle against terrorism did not begin with the bombing of our embassies in Africa, nor will it end with today's strike. It will require strength, courage, and endurance. We will not yield to this threat. We will meet it no matter how long it may take. This will be a long, ongoing struggle between freedom and fanaticism, between the rule of law and terrorism. We must be prepared to do all that we can for as long as we must. America is and will remain a target of terrorists precisely because we are leaders, because we act to advance peace, democracy, and basic human values, because we're the most open society on earth, and because, as we have shown yet again, we take an uncompromising stand against terrorism. But of this, I am also sure. The risks from inaction to America and the world would be far greater than action. For that would embolden our enemies, leaving their ability and their willingness to strike us intact. In this case, we knew before our attack that these groups already had planned further actions against us and others. I want to reiterate. The United States wants peace, not conflict. We want to lift lives around the world, not take them. We have worked for peace in Bosnia, in Northern Ireland, in Haiti, in the Middle East, and elsewhere. But in this day, no campaign for peace can succeed without a determination to fight terrorism. Let our actions today send this message loud and clear. There are no expendable American targets. There will be no sanctuary for terrorists. We will defend our people, our interests, and our values. We will help people of all faiths in all parts of the world who want to live free of fear and violence. We will persist, and we will prevail. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless our country.
Two extraordinary appearances by this president today to announce to the American people and the world military action taken by U.S. forces in the areas of Afghanistan and also the Sudan. The president fingered Osama bin Laden, the wealthy Saudi revolutionary. Mr. Clinton said that the bin Laden terrorist network was responsible for the bombings at the American embassies in Kenya and also in Tanzania. The president said, "Our target is terror. Our mission is clear, to strike at targets funded by bin Laden and his terrorist network." The president noted that 12 Americans and nearly 300 Kenyans and Tanzanians were killed in the two bombings, more than 5,000 people wounded. And very, very sensitively, the president referred to Islam. At one point he said, with some emotion, "Our actions were not aimed against Islam." Very emphatically, Mr. Clinton went on to say, "Our actions were aimed at fanatics and killers." He said this is a struggle between freedom and fanaticism, and as you just heard him say, there are no expendable American targets, unquote. Over at the Pentagon, our military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre has an update with some more information. Jamie?
Well, Bernie, you heard President Clinton say that this war is just starting. It's going to be a long battle, and because of that, the Pentagon has been unusually reticent in revealing any details of the military action that took place, these two strikes. But CNN has pieced together from various sources the following scenario. Apparently, according to our sources, this attack was launched from U.S. ships, U.S. Navy ships in both the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea. 2 Navy ships in the Red Sea, 4 surface ships in the Arabian Sea, plus 1 submarine. Launched between all of them somewhere between 75 and 100 cruise missiles at the targets in Afghanistan and in Sudan. The reason for the selection of the cruise missile, which has a long range and a powerful 1,000-pound warhead, was twofold. One, to keep the operation a complete secret. Using these pilotless missiles, the U.S. did not have to put any troops on alert or make any moves that would signal impending military action. And secondly, to minimize the risk to U.S. pilots by not using manned aircraft, the United States was able to ensure that there would be no U.S. casualties in this operation. The cruise missiles are a very powerful and very accurate weapon. The latest ones use global positioning satellites to pinpoint targets. The footage that we saw from Sudanese television that showed the damage to the chemical plant, which is claimed by the Sudanese to be a pharmaceutical factory. This is typical of the kind of damage that can be wrought by cruise missiles. Eyewitnesses there said they saw about 5 cruise missiles going into this facility in Sudan, which was shown on Sudanese television. We do not have a breakdown of how many missiles were fired at each target. Presumably over the next couple of days, the Pentagon will be evaluating some of that information. Bernie?
Jamie, and the president gave us quite a bit of intelligence when he talked about the camps there in Afghanistan, did he not?
Well, he did call this the preeminent, Osama bin Laden as the preeminent sponsor of international terrorism. This Saudi businessman, of course, has a huge bankroll and is able to bankroll some of those activities.
I was intrigued by the president noting that the American intelligence community came to learn that a very important meeting was due to be held there tomorrow in these camps.
Well, Bernie, I'm not aware of that development. It's just something that hasn't come across in my reporting so far.
Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. Judy?
All right, we'll continue with our coverage of this breaking story. We'll be back with an interview with the Sudanese ambassador to the United Nations after this break. Fired this afternoon against targets in the Sudan and in Afghanistan. CNN's White House correspondent Wolf Blitzer is standing by. Wolf, was the president telling us everything pretty much that they're putting out there at the White House?
No, we'll be getting more details. There's going to be a briefing here at the White House from Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and National Security Advisor Sandy Berger providing us with more details. That should be coming up fairly soon. The president wanted to, in his Oval Office address, give the big picture, outline the main reasons why the United States decided to make this move. The risks of inaction, he said, were far greater than action because if the United States did not respond, he said that would embolden America's enemies. He also suggested that this bin Laden group was planning more actions against U.S. targets around the world. That's why the United States began to move. I thought it was interesting, Judy, that he specifically pointed out that this decision he made was the result of what he described as a unanimous recommendation from his national security advisors, including the generals over at the Pentagon, designed perhaps the only oblique reference, indirect reference to some of those accusations that have been coming from Senator Dan Coats and a handful of other critics that perhaps Mr. Clinton was simply trying to change the subject from the Monica Lewinsky investigation.
Wolf, just how sensitive are the people around the president to those allegations?
They're very sensitive, Judy. There's a fierce anger that the United States, that the President Clinton, despite all of his problems resulting from Ken Starr's investigation, would risk U.S. troops, would risk U.S. military personnel, if you will, to engage in this kind of operation simply to change the subject. So there's a lot of anger here. One official saying about an hour or so ago, it makes my blood boil to hear this kind of talk from the president's critics.
All right, Wolf Blitzer at the White House. Bernie?
Al-Fatih Awa is Sudan's ambassador to the United Nations. He is in New York City. He joins us now. Mr. Ambassador, have you had any communications with the United States government?
Me personally, I didn't have, but the United States government has communicated with our embassy in Washington. And strange enough that we learned from them that this was not directed to the government, not directed to the Sudanese people, but is directed against Osama bin Laden. I think the United States government has all the right to track Osama bin Laden. But what has Osama bin Laden got to do with a factory, for pharmaceutical factory for antibiotics, which is owned by a private businessman? And this factory was being financed before by the COMESA, which is the commercial East African and Southern African community. And that's really very strange.
Go ahead.
Mr. Ambassador, you disagree with the United States version, which holds that this factory that we're looking at, pictures of it now, was an alleged chemical weapons factory, and it was making precursors for use in nerve gas?
I think these allegations for the simple, poor Sudanese people, it's a big joke, because this factory is situated in the middle of what they call industrial area. It's a simple, small industrial area. It's near a very important neighborhood. I myself, personally, my house is 1 kilometer, my family house is 1 kilometer far from this this factory or whatever. And I don't believe that this would be a chemical weapon industrial installation.
You just raised an interesting point. You say your family's house is 1 kilometer from the factory we're just looking at. Have you talked with any of your family members or relatives since the attack?
I tried to, because the first thing raised to my mind that I knew that some bombing happened that night for them, and I don't know what their safety. Until this moment, I don't know how are they. And really, as I said, my own personal house is 1 kilometer far from these alleged chemical weapons. How could it be situated in a residential area?
And so your quote, if I heard you correctly, in response to what President Clinton said was going on at this factory, your response is, quote, it's a big joke?
That's true. It's a big joke for all the Sudanese people, because they know well and good this factory. It's a factory which has been established 3 years ago or 4 years, and it was financed by some African financing, by the COMESA, or which used to be the PTA, the Preferential Trade Area.
Mr. Ambassador, what's the next step here for your government?
I think we are going to file a complaint to the Security Council, because as I listened to His Excellency the President Clinton's address, he mentioned Sudan that only it's because this is tracking bin Laden for this installation. There are means to deal with these things within the international law. Even if you have allegations, you have to go and see it. We didn't receive any warning that we are doing this, or we didn't get anything from the United Nations that they want to search a certain facility or whatever. It's just suddenly cruise missiles hitting somewhere, alleging that it's a chemical weapon.
Does Osama bin Laden have sanctuary in your country?
Osama bin Laden entered Sudan in 1992 as a businessman, and he established a road construction company. 2 years ago, or exactly in May 1996, we kicked him out of the country just because the American government asked us to do that. And we kicked him out, and we said, where do you want him to go? They said he can go anywhere. We informed them even beforehand that he wanted to go to Afghanistan. They said, we don't care, as long as he doesn't go to Somalia. And this, I'm revealing this now as true facts, which has been negotiations between my government and the American government at that time. Even his own properties in Sudan have been liquidated according to the American government's conditions to us.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador, thanks for joining us on our live coverage of this breaking story.
Thank you.